this, I want to make sure that this responds to your needs. By the way, a little Zoom tip. If you haven't discovered it yet with Zoom, you can choose any background that you want. So I have chosen the water tower from the Polytechnic campus as mine. I assume that's what you're seeing, but you can choose anything. I talked with another dean this morning who had a scene from Antarctica there, because it is one place on Earth where there's no coronavirus now for sure. And please call me Duane as well. I grew up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin, and when I was a kid on a dairy farm, never once did anyone call me professor or dean or doctor. So I would be grateful if you did that. So let's get started. That in the text box there, it talks about if you do a search on teaching portfolio, you're going to find all sorts of examples. And there are how-to sites that are out there. Some of them are better than others, and there are also lots of examples. One of the things that I encourage you to do is to search on teaching portfolio and look for people in your discipline and how they do that, to see how they represent that. The other thing I want to mention is that in my experience these days, and for many years now, graduate students are always asked for some component from a teaching portfolio. And we'll talk more about what the most common ones are. And I've even had some cases where students have gone on the job market, and as part of the interview, they have walked the search committee through the teaching portfolio that they've constructed. I've indicated some works cited there. I'll just mention a couple of them. And by the way, I'm not looking directly in the camera because my handout is off to the side here on the other monitor. Ernest Boyer's book, Scholarship Reconsidered, and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. But this is the book in 1990 that really got people thinking about all of this stuff about representing a wide range of the work we do in the academy. Then the Edgerton, Hutchings, and Quinlan book is a pretty popular one. The classic Huber and Maroff book, Scholarship Assessed, Evaluation of the Professoriate, that's a sequel to the Ernest Boyer book, and I'll come back to that a little bit later as well. And then I want to mention the Peter Selden book and the one with Mary Lou Higgerson. Those two books are probably the most commonly cited books, especially the 2004 book with Peter Selden. And then Lee Shulman, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's a little short thing. If you do a Google search on it, you can find it on the web. And he makes the case for why it's important to look at the scholarship of teaching and learning. Then I want to draw a distinction as we go along today among effective teaching, scholarly teaching, and the scholarship of teaching. And actually it should be the scholarship of teaching and learning. And I hope that everybody on this call is at least committed to effective teaching. And effective teaching has to be defined as teaching that results in learning. If it doesn't result in learning, by definition, it's not effective. Now, no matter how good we think it might be. And then scholarly teaching, and Lee Shulman, by the way, used to be president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. And he makes the case there that scholarly teaching is teaching that's well-grounded in whatever resources are available in the field. It doesn't mean that you have a PhD in teaching or learning or curriculum and instruction. It just means that you're familiar with what other people in your field are saying about teaching and learning. And then the scholarship of teaching and learning means that we treat our teaching the same way we would treat our research. That is, it's carefully constructed, it's well informed with theory, research, and practice in the field. It's shared with others. It's critiqued the same way that research articles would be. Questions about those three before we move on? Okay. So Shannon, is everyone able to turn on their mics if they do have a question?
They are able to turn on their mics.
Okay.
And at the moment, we are monitoring the chat.
Okay.
We
So if
don't,
you,
there aren't any questions currently, but if we do have a question, I will let you know.
okay, good. And please do, folks, as we go along, if you have questions, turn on your mics. All right. So Boyer in 1990, I said this is the book that really got these conversations going. He talked about, actually, in the book, 4 kinds of scholarship, and then he had an article that followed that talked about a 5th kind of scholarship. So he talks about the scholarship of discovery, traditionally what we consider our research to be, whether we do research on honeybees or how people learn to write or whatever it is. And then I'm going to skip integration, come back to that. And then the scholarship of application is, how can I take what I've learned? How can we take what we've learned and apply it to solve real world problems? So for example, former Provost Rob Page is a biologist who studies honeybee DNA. And so he uses the incredible research that he's done to help address the problem of honeybee population declines worldwide. And then the scholarship of integration means, how do we make connections across the disciplines? Because the problems in the world, the big problems in the world, almost never can be solved from a single disciplinary perspective. For example, the one we're dealing with right now, coronavirus. We've got people from a wide range of disciplines at ASU working on that. We've got, not just scientists, but the people who are supporting teaching and learning at ASU. And we're on Zoom today because of technology that we're using because of the response to coronavirus. We would all be in the same room together if it weren't for that. Working across disciplines is extremely important. And then the 4th category that I already mentioned, the scholarship of teaching and learning. How do we make our teaching and learning as well informed and as well critiqued as our research? And then the 5th kind that he talks about in a sequel article, and I probably should add that to the handout, is the scholarship of engagement. How do we engage with the community and with others? And by the way, I think that all of us in the academy need to be engaged in the community. And if we do that on a regular basis, we're going to garner a lot more support for higher education. And I'll mention how I do that. Shannon already mentioned the project for writing and recording family history. I do family history workshops, history writing workshops out in the Valley, a minimum of twice a month and up to 8 times a month, evenings and weekends. But then beyond that, I have about 25 East Valley groups, mayors, city councils, chambers of commerce, business groups, education groups, K-12 districts, community groups, faith-based groups that I meet with every month to promote ASU and to promote the Polytechnic campus in particular. I'm not advocating that all of you get that involved at this point in your careers, but any little thing that we can all be doing out in the community, it really pays off. And it could be something you have that you enjoy. Maybe you enjoy playing a musical instrument, and so you teach others out in the community how to play that instrument. Then some questions. Any questions from any of you before we go on? Okay.
We don't have any questions in the chat.
Okay. There are 6 categories here of criteria for what constitutes good scholarship in any of the categories I talked about earlier. And that is, it's got clear goals. And once those goals are set, the people who engage in this work are adequately prepared. And and by the way, I am going to ask you to turn on your mics in a minute because I really need some audience participation on some of these. And then appropriate methods, the best way to do what we are planning to do to achieve our goals. Significant results, that is, result. Oh, go ahead.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? Would it be possible for you to zoom in a bit on the document so that
Yes.
you can
Yep.
see it better? All right.
Okay. Is that big enough? Is that big enough, Shannon?
That looks great. Thank you.
Okay. And then significant results, results that make a difference in the world. Effective presentation. That is, if we've done all this good work, we need to present it to others in ways that make it understandable to them, clear to them, and then reflective critique. All right. Let me go through this now 2 more times. So the first time, I'm going to go through and I'm going to ask you to participate here. We're going to talk about research and creative activity. So for the research that you or anyone else does, what is the overall goal? I assume there's some researchers online today.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet. So just to remind everyone that they should be able to unmute their audio and join in the conversation.
Vanessa, I see that you're...
Yes, I unmuted. I have a question. I would like to, you mean research for our own personal research or research in connection to the classes that we're teaching?
The research that you're doing for your graduate degree and presumably you'll do throughout your career.
So I'm at the School of Sustainability. And I'll just share that the research that I'm doing, I'm working on trying to help people in general in the United States, but also other countries, move away from the coastline.
To do what? I had a hard time hearing.
To move away from the coastline.
Okay, all right. So you actually, going back to the kinds of scholarships that we were talking about, I heard the scholarship of application there.
Absolutely. There's a scholarship of application, but it's also integration because the work that I do is not only legal and policy oriented, but also tied to the physical sciences, specifically coastal change. And in my case, I end up having to do discovery because there hasn't been a lot of work done on the governance of that area.
Okay. So for everybody on this call, on this Zoom session, in one word or one short phrase, what would be the goal of our scholarship of discovery?
We have a going to back up just a little bit to say that we have a couple of other answers to your original questions.
Okay.
The research is to find solutions to problems.
Application.
And specifically to improve health care for older adults.
A very specific application. Okay.
Then to get published and find significant results and expand the knowledge in the field.
There we go, to expand the knowledge in the field. That's the overall umbrella of what we're all doing, is to expand that knowledge. And then once we have that knowledge base, we apply it. So good, thank you. And then for those of you who engage in empirical research, what have you done to prepare yourselves to engage in that research? Emily?
Hi, yes. I'm in the School of Human Evolution and Social Change. And one way I prepared for empirical research is I applied for grants. I conduct research in archaeology outside of the country, and so I needed grants and permits to conduct my research.
Okay, and let me follow up on that. What did you do to prepare yourself to be in a position to apply for grants?
I read lots of previous research.
Okay,
and
yep.
I received feedback, I guess.
Okay, good. And what else do people do to prepare themselves to engage in research?
I was going to offer also the literature review and becoming knowledgeable in what is currently in the science, but then it's also expanding my network and collaborating with other researchers.
Good, two good things. Yes, becoming familiar with what other people have done, and then networking with others who do this work as well. And that helps in multiple ways to be able to do this research. So if you do empirical research where you look at data, there's something else that you have done to prepare yourself to do that research.
Skylar says, I prepare with quantitative training, but there's substantial background noise, so Skylar's going to stay muted.
Okay, all right, exactly. So we learn statistical methods, for example, to do that work. Exactly. Okay, so those are just a couple examples. And then appropriate methods. I hear people who say, quantitative methods are the best. And then I hear other people say, no, qualitative methods are the best. What's wrong with that argument?
It's excluding a method. If you're focused only on quantitative, then we miss out on some of the experiences that a qualitative method brings to our knowledge.
Exactly. And then beyond that, so what determines what kind of method we use? How do we decide what method to use?
The research question?
The question, right? What's the question we want to answer? And for some kinds of research, quantitative and qualitative methods are both wrong. They won't work. So if I want to know what happened during the bubonic plague, for example, what methods am I going to use?
Historical analyses?
Yeah, historical analyses, a lot of textual analysis. And I might use some qualitative or quantitative methods associated with that, but I might just want to tell the stories, which is sort of qualitative. And then significant results. Those of you who do research, you know that if you do empirical research, there's the level of significance that we used in statistical analyses. But regardless of the kind of results that we get, let's say we're doing historical work rather than quantitative or qualitative, what constitutes significant results from a historical study? Or even from beyond, if we go back to an empirical study, significance has another meaning besides just achieving that probability level. Significance also means something that makes a real difference in the world. That's what significant is. All right, and then effective presentation. How do you know with your presentation of the research that you've done that the presentation is effective? What's the single most clear-cut signal that what you've done is effective?
That the learner knows what we've taught.
Well, we're going to talk about teaching in a minute, but for research, let's say you're doing that research on honeybee DNA.
Oh.
How do we... Go ahead.
A couple of answers from the chat. Receiving citations, or
even before you receive citations. Go ahead, Shannon.
Or publishing.
You got published, yes.
Feedback.
Exactly, you got published. If it got published, it's considered effective presentation. And then we'll come back to, and then reflective critique. Someone already mentioned getting cited. That's critique. And we get critique during the review of manuscript process as well. All right, let's go back through this one more time. And this time, let's talk about teaching. In one word, what is the goal of teaching?
Learning.
Learning, exactly. And how do you prepare yourself to teach so that learning occurs?
The chat seems to be silent, but I would say you yourself are learning. Oh, we've got a few answers here. Set up learning objectives and assessments that align with those objectives. You know, have an engaging teaching style.
Those kinds of things. Yeah. So let's say that I do what happened in big way this last week. In my college, before this week, about 50% of the students, we have about 8,000 students in my college in majors, and just over 4,000 of them are in online degree programs, and just over 4,000 of them are in campus-based programs. But as of Monday of this week, everybody's online. There is no more face-to-face, well, except through Zoom. There is no more face-to-face in classroom teaching. So let's say that I gave you the luxury of having from now until next fall to prepare to teach online. What would you do between now and next fall to prepare yourself to teach online?
Learn about the best pedagogical practices for online teaching.
Yeah, and that, by the way, that observation applies to not just online, but to face-to-face teaching as well. Good. What else?
Look at colleagues' previous online courses and modules from the chat. Develop new assessments that can be used in the online environment. Think about your assignments, create videos, learn the platforms that you're teaching in.
Yay, great stuff. Great stuff. By the way, the last 2 weeks, the biggest challenge has been for faculty who teach science lab courses. So they've had to really scramble, but we're working at it and they're making it work. So proud of faculty at ASU. And then appropriate methods. So in the 20th century, the default method in higher education was what?
Lecture.
Lecture, exactly. So let's say that I had a debate with somebody and said, lecture is the best way to teach. And someone said, no, small group discussion is the best way to teach. Or someone says, large group discussion is the best way to teach, or so on and so forth. So what's wrong with that discussion as I just portrayed it?
It's just like the qualitative, quantitative thing. You're exclusionary depending on which side you come down on, and that's not necessarily the most holistic method.
Right, and it depends on what you want to accomplish at the end. So for example, if I want students to be able to write an effective essay by the end of the course, what do they need to be doing during the course?
Writing.
Writing. And then if you generalize from that, if I want students to be able to apply knowledge by the end of the course, I need to ask them to be applying knowledge throughout the course. If I just lecture at them all semester and then say, all right, folks, course is over, go apply all this stuff, it's not going to be very effective. And so we have to figure out what do we want them to be able to do, and then they need to practice doing that throughout the course. Then significant results, in one word again, significant results is learning, and then effective presentation. So, and this is where we really get into the teaching portfolio. Effective presentation here has two meanings. One is, how do I present, how do I engage students in course learning so that they actually learn? but then the teaching portfolio is about how do I represent my teaching to other people who are interested in this. So for example, how do I represent my work with students to search committees? How do I represent my teaching to people who do annual evaluations on me? How do I represent my teaching to people who make tenure and promotion decisions about me? And that's what the teaching portfolio is all about. Now, for our students, we don't need to have teaching portfolios to give to them because they're experiencing our teaching on a daily basis. But our colleagues are not there in the room with us. And maybe in the future they will be. Maybe in the future, everyone will have Zoom turned on in their classrooms all the time and anyone can come in and observe whenever they want. I think actually that would be wonderful. So, you know, how do we make these things clear to our colleagues who are not in the room with us or in Zoom with us or in that online space every day? And then reflective critique, you know, how do I, typically, when does the critique of teaching of any course occur? Or what's the most common time when it occurs?
Student evaluations at the end of the course.
Exactly, student evaluations at the end of the course. Now, what's the problem with that? I mean, it's not bad in and of itself, but what's the problem if we only rely on course evaluations at the end of the course?
Our chat seems to agree that that the student evaluations can be biased. There's no time to adjust the teaching, no time to continuously improve.
Yeah, there's no time to continuously improve. So that needs to occur throughout the course. And a teaching portfolio is one way to be doing that. Okay, so let's move on. In the handout, which you all got in digital form, is this grid that shows the 4 categories of academic scholarship that Boyer talked about. And we could add the 5th one, engagement as well. And then the 6 categories of criteria for evaluating this. By the way, the classic Huber and Maroff book, the way they came up with those 6 criteria, clear goals, adequate prep, and so on, is they surveyed publishers of academic presses and other scholarly presses. They surveyed people who are engaged in decisions about promotion and tenure, and they asked them to list the criteria for high quality scholarship. And these are the 6 criteria that surfaced over and over and over again. And I have written lots of articles, by the way, about these 6 criteria. And it's amazing how widely these 6 criteria can apply, not only to the work we do in the academy, but the work that we do out in the world outside of the academy. So I encourage you to play with that a little bit. Now, any questions before we go on? Or any comments, complaints, refutations? Okay. So some common contents of teaching portfolios. These are the most common contents of teaching portfolios. And I want to note that guiding question at the top. What will make my teaching visible? And again, that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. We don't need to do that for our students because they're witnessing it every day. But for our colleagues who are making decisions about whether to hire us, whether to give us an annual, high annual evaluation score, or to grant us tenure and promotion, we need to make the teaching visible to them. And so let me start. Teaching philosophy. Teaching philosophy does 2 things. It says, here's what I do, and here's why I do it in my teaching. And the teaching philosophy in a teaching portfolio, full teaching portfolio, is usually the first document that appears. Why is that? Why would it make sense to make that the first document in a teaching portfolio?
Emily offers that it sets the stage for the themes to cover.
Great job, Emily. Yes, exactly. It sets the context, it sets the themes for everything that's going to come. And it's a filter through which people then will read everything that's going to come. And we're going to look at an example a little bit later. And then probably the second most requested part of a teaching portfolio are student evaluations that are synthesized and contextualized. What do you think I mean by synthesized and contextualized?
Just want to remind anyone that they can jump in and unmute themselves at any point. They don't have to only type their answers in the chat.
Yes, good reminder.
Perhaps you don't want to present every student comment in your evaluation, but rather a sampling of them, or maybe you could compare your evaluations of that course to previous iterations of the course.
Yes, all right, yes, good start, yes. I will, you do want, because let's follow up on that second observation. What does it show if you compare your current teaching evaluations to prior teaching evaluations? We hope.
That you've improved as a teacher over time.
Exactly. And, that's one of the things. You might not be the world's strongest teacher right now, but if we see that you're making progress, as a hiring committee, we're going to say, this is someone who's working at it. This is someone who, through work, is going to get better and better and better, and that's what we want. Now, I do want to comment on the sampling. When I remember at one point I was at the University of Arizona, and I applied for a job at Syracuse University, and I went there as a full professor and as an administrator. And they asked me for full sets of teaching evaluations from 3 consecutive semesters. And so I sent all of them. I made photocopies and sent all of them, but then I did provide on the top a cover letter that synthesized and contextualized them. The reason you don't want to pick and choose, well, I'll let you tell me. Why do you not want to pick and choose? When you synthesize, you can do a little picking and choosing, but
Nikita offers that it might be biased, might not necessarily show the growth, is what I think. And then Janet says that it doesn't give the whole picture.
It doesn't give the whole picture, yes. And search committees and tenure committees can be a little cynical at times. And so if you pick and choose, they wonder, what are the ones you didn't pick and choose? And by the way, there are certain things in teaching evaluations that you have to address. So if a student, for example, you have a class of 50 students and 3 of them say, she made me work way too hard in this course. Is that something you need to explain?
We have a no.
That's right. It's a no. Because when hiring committees and tenure promotion committees read that some students think you work them too hard, those committees are going to cheer. And they're going to give you a standing ovation for having those high standards. But on the other hand, if you say, let me give you an example. Years ago, when I was director of the writing programs in the English department on the Tempe campus, I read teaching evaluations for one of the instructors, and there was one that says she never showed up for office hours. And so I talked to teacher, and I said, someone said you never showed up for office hours. And she said, well, that's not true. And I said, I was always there. And I said, well, do you have any explanation for why a student would have written that? And by the way, students aren't always too truthful in these matters. And she said, well, there were a couple times during office hours when I went to use the restroom. And so, and that turned into, she never shows up for office hours. So there are some comments that do need to be addressed, and make sure you do so in a way that helps people understand. And the synthesizing, by the way, helps people to see the trends, the main themes in your teaching evaluations. It sets the stage for the reading. So if you say, you know, students comment on that I have high expectations for them, but that I provide support for them to reach those high expectations, now you've encouraged readers to start looking for those comments that show that you've got those high expectations and provide that support. And then the other part about contextualizing is, think about this. Might you get different course evaluations from an upper division, let's say a 400 level elective course in the major, as opposed to a 100 level required general studies course? And of course the answer is, yeah, you could expect some differences there. That 400 elective course, only the people who really want to be there are there. And that 100 level general studies course, they're there because they're required to be there. So anyway.
We have a quick question.
Yeah.
For graduate students who aren't listed as an instructor and therefore aren't automatically evaluated through ASU's evaluations, what do you recommend?
Good point. And that's a general principle. When I talk about constructing the CV, when I could talk about constructing the teaching portfolio as well, you know, you only can base this on the experience you have, but you also can base this on, you know, if you're asked to produce a teaching portfolio, but you haven't taught, there's some parts of this that are you're not going to have teaching evaluations, for example. You just don't have them. But you can talk about, you know, what are the things that you value in teaching? And so we assume then if you value student-centeredness, that you value interaction in the classroom, those kinds of things, we assume that you're truthful. We don't ever assume that anyone's lying, and that is how you will approach your teaching. So if you're not the instructor of record, one of the things that you can do is, let's say you're doing a breakout section or you're doing something else where you don't get a teaching evaluation. There is a faculty member who is familiar with your teaching in that course. And I would make sure that I ask for at least one faculty member who knows your teaching to write a letter for you about your teaching. The one thing you can't do is pat yourself on the back anywhere in your application materials. You could talk about your commitment to teaching, your commitment to research, your commitment to whatever, but you can't say, hey, I'm great at it. Other people need to say that. And by the way, if you are an effective teacher and you have teaching evaluations, that'll come out. Students will be saying that for you. So anyway, let's move on from that. Teaching evaluations are important. Peer reviews of teaching, and in some departments at ASU and in my college, it's just a way of life where faculty visit their courses all the time. When I was director of the writing program in the English department in Tempe, graduate students would visit each other's classes all the time and write reviews of what was going on. So peers can mean faculty, it can mean other graduate students. And then moving on, some syllabi that are annotated. And I know that some of you are teaching courses where the syllabus is handed to you. But the other thing you can be doing is you can be developing syllabi for your dream courses. That course that you would love to teach once you have the opportunity. And then make that syllabus as rich as you can, as full of details as you can. Brian Collier, a former president of the Graduate and Professional Students Association, said, oh, you mean the director's cut of the syllabus? Yes, the director's cut, with little text boxes in it, for example, explaining things. And then sample lesson plans, again, annotated. And by the way, things that you might want to annotate are things like, here's the textbook that I chose. And you all know that for any given course, there could be dozens of choices of textbooks. In some fields, there might even be more than dozens. So why did you choose this particular textbook? If you're using a lot of small group work, why are you doing that? If you're using lecture, why are you doing that? So that people understand the thinking that you're going through as you're constructing this teaching experience for your students. And then course assignments, again, annotated. And then I want to talk about number 7, growing out of number 6. So in your teaching portfolio, you have a course assignment, and then you show some students' work that was produced in response to that assignment. And by the way, if you include students' work, make sure that you get written permission from them to use it. Think worst case scenario. I've, in my career, encountered cases where faculty were talking and said, oh, there was this paper in my class, a student in my class who wrote this fantastic paper about the physics of a curveball in baseball. And another faculty member sitting there, well, that a student in my class did the same thing. Or that same student in another class did the same thing. So make sure that students know that you're going to use their work. It's the ethical thing to do. I mean, you just have to do it. It doesn't have to be long. It can be one sentence. I give so-and-so permission to use my work in his or her teaching portfolio. Now, here's my question about number 7. Do you want to include your very best student's very best piece of work in the portfolio? Is that the best thing to do?
We have a no. And then follow up, another no, because you want to show your feedback to the student. I think that it might be a good idea to have an example of a couple of different types of student work.
Exactly. And the comment, go back to that, at that sent guiding question at the top. What will make my teaching visible? And I like to think of this as the It's a Wonderful Life phenomena. If you just show the best work by your best student, it's possible that that student could have done that work even if you had never been born, which is one of the premises of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life. And so you have to show that your teaching made a difference in this student's life. So show that feedback, as one of you said. Show an early draft of a paper, your feedback, and then how that got better. And not just a paper, it could be any sort of student work, a project of any kind. Make your teaching visible. Then number 8, evidence of professional development in teaching is another good thing to do. So when you go to that national convention in your field, do you only go to the research sessions, or do you go to the teaching sessions as well? And in my field, at least, every conference has teaching sessions in addition to research sessions. Okay, I'm going to skip administrative portfolios. For those of you who some point in your lives do that kind of work, that will be important. Then pages 5 through 8, I think it is. A few years ago, I did several colleagues and I did a half-day workshop on constructing professional portfolios in higher education. And this was our long list of possible contents for that. So you can look at that in your leisure. You're all graduate students, so you got all those lonely Friday nights. You got one coming up tonight, so you can read this tonight. Okay. All right. Now, I want to walk through this table of contents for a teaching portfolio. Laura Bush is a former student of mine and former colleague of mine. This was the table of contents for her teaching portfolio as she was finishing up her doctoral degree. So as we talked about earlier, there at the top, first in the portfolio is her teaching philosophy. Then she's got a writing sample. And by the way, it was about how to become a more humane teacher. Her area of research was Western women's writers of the 19th and 20th centuries. And so, but then here was this article about her work in the classroom. And she published it in a journal that's clearly focused on teaching. So that shows a commitment to teaching. All I have to see is that bibliographic entry, and I see that commitment. Then she's got classroom observations by advisors and mentors. These were faculty in the college. And then number 4, classroom observations by peers. Those were fellow graduate students that were going through the program with her. They visited each other's classrooms all the time. Then she's got some syllabi. And by the way, if it's simply a syllabus that's handed to you and you use it, that's not very helpful. Again, you need to have some hand in this. Then she's got syllabi from literature courses taught with professors. That is, the professor did the large lecture and she did the breakout section. So she provides that. And then number 7, sample syllabi of possible courses to teach. Remember I said her research was on women's writing. So look at number 7.1, women's autobiography in the American West. So she's taken her graduate research, and turned that into a course that she would like to teach. And then crafted identities, constructing the self online, which is still an interesting topic today. And by the way, I want to mention this, that it's very common in interviews for committees to ask applicants for jobs, what's a dream course? And one of the things that I recommend is, develop a little bit of a dream course. And the dream course doesn't need to have all the apparatus. You don't need to have attendance policies and all of that. But what's the content of that course, and what's so exciting about it? Why do you want to teach it? What makes it cutting edge? And have that to share with committees. And those sample syllabi should sort of on the cutting edge, but not too wild and crazy, like maybe not a course on the physics of SpongeBob SquarePants, for example. And then she's got some sample lesson plans and sample assignments, some sample online discussions from a course. For example, this session is being recorded. Could put that in teaching portfolio if I were going on the market. And again, if students are identified in any way, either through their voice or through face that's visible, then you need to get their permission to use that in your teaching portfolio. Although if it's just online comments, you can blur out the name, take out the names. And student evaluations, and then a few things certifying her development as a teacher. Okay, now I want to talk about this example. So this is Chris Elder, who's now an associate professor at the University of New Mexico. And at the time when she wrote this, she was a doctoral student at Purdue University, finishing up. And she did this teaching philosophy. And let me tell you about, a teaching philosophy has to have some sort of framework. So the framework could be your chronological development as a teacher. That's one way to frame it. Another would be, what are challenges that you faced and that you've overcome? Now it's sort of chronological as well. But what she did, she took a document, and it's mentioned at the bottom here of this page, the Framework for Success in Post-Secondary Writing, which talks about 8 habits for being a successful learner in a writing course. And she picked 3 of them: flexibility, engagement, and responsibility. And Shannon, is it true that everybody has theirs in front of them? Or
They should, but I don't know if
right.
everyone actually will.
Okay, well, let's do it this way then. So instead of having you read the whole thing, let's just read one section at a time. Is this large enough so everyone can read it on their screens? I assume you're sitting close to your screens as I am. Is that true?
Yes, everyone that's responding is saying that it's good.
Okay, so read the section on flexibility, and then let's talk about that. Has everyone had time to read that section?
Yes, we can proceed.
Okay, so I hope people will unmute here. So what do you notice about this section? What stands out to you? What do you think, what resonates with you? What do you think makes you believe that this is or could be an effective teacher?
Yes, specific examples were given.
Yeah, specific examples. That's really important. Why is it important to have specific examples?
Shows your experience.
Shows your experience. And what else does it show? Actually, it shows something that's related to that. It shows that you're not just making this up. It shows, and again, we don't distrust anybody, but it shows, to build on the comment, it shows your experience. She shows how she has this experience in the classroom. You get to see what that experience looks like. You get to see how this principle she's talking about actually can play out in the classroom. What else do you notice in this section?
She describes instances of learning,
Okay.
like not just what she taught, but how students actually learned the information that she was conveying.
Exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
there are actual outcomes in here.
Exactly.
There's also outcome from someone who is not a core from the core program, like someone from the food studies who doesn't relate necessarily to this class in particular, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
There's more than one example.
More than one example. Yes. Why is that important?
To show that it's a theme rather than just a one-time thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it shows it can be generalized as well. Okay. Anything else before I move on to the next section? Okay. So this is engagement. Let me give you the, whoops. Let me let you start reading this, and then I'll scroll a little bit. Has everyone had a chance to finish it?
Yeah, I think we can proceed.
Okay, good. So what stands out in this section on engagement? Either more of what you saw before or something new that you're seeing here. Or another question is, how credible is she in telling her story about her teaching?
I think she's trying to explain what she's doing from why she's doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you look at the line like 1 or 2 there, like to help build a sense of community with the class within the classroom.
Yeah.
That's why she's trying to like, yeah, giving the, yeah, kind of assignment to her students.
Was it a good choice for her to talk about building community in the classroom, by the way? Do you consider community in the classroom to be important or not that important?
I'm just going to chime in a little bit. The chat's silent at the moment, so I'm going to offer my thoughts on this subject.
Okay.
From my teaching perspective, I feel like it's important to build a community in the classroom. And I believe that most institutions would probably be favorable to reading something like this because through that community comes learning. I also think that in a larger lecture room where maybe you have 300 students, it might be very difficult to build a sense of community. So part of it might come into knowing really the institution that you're applying to and what those class sizes look like, what they're valuing, what they're looking for you to do in the classroom.
Exactly. And, you know, she's teaching writing courses, and writing courses tend to be smaller. And so it's a little easier to do this kind of thing. And again, that's a good point. You know, you have to think about what's my teaching experience? What will my teaching experience be when I apply for it? So if I'm going to be teaching these large classes, and by the way, I want to mention writing is my field, and I have taught smaller classes throughout my career. But a few years ago, I got asked to develop a global freshman academy version of English 101 and 102. And the first time we taught English 101, we had 35,000 students in the course. And one of the things we did was to build community, and we did that by breaking those 35,000 students into smaller groups of about 4 or 5 who worked together throughout the course. So
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If you were, creating this teaching philosophy for an institution like ASU, where you have a lot of online instruction, and you want to talk about engagement and building community, but most of your engagement has been, in person, is your teaching philosophy a good point to bring up ideas of how you would translate those same strategies to the online space? Or do you just want to stick with what you know and have implemented?
I think you've hit on a very important topic. I would say yes. Here's how I think I can translate my in-person teaching experience to online. And by the way, a lot of faculty this last week have been, they've been in a position where they've had to do that. But the other thing is, do a Google search on building community and online teaching. There's a ton of stuff out there. So this is another case where, remember that category of scholarly teaching that's based on the existing scholarship about teaching. So I would go read a little bit at least about how to build community in online environments. and there's a ton there. So you can talk about, you know, how you've thought about it, how you've maybe not yet had the opportunity, but I wouldn't talk about I haven't had the opportunity. I would simply say, I have done this in my in-person classrooms, and I have read about how people build community in online environments, and I'm eager to have an opportunity to apply what I've thought about and what I've read about. So don't emphasize what you haven't done, emphasize what you have done and what you're eager to do.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. Anything else? Okay. By the way, this coronavirus thing really has made me think a lot about community. I've watched these videos about the behavior of some people in Costco's and Walmart's, and then when I go to shop at my neighborhood grocery store, I make sure that as I'm waiting in line to get into the store, which is a new phenomenon, that I have conversation with everybody around me to help build community. So I think we should be doing that at every opportunity in our lives, not just in our classrooms. And then this final one about responsibility. Give you a couple minutes to read that, and then let's talk about that. So everyone had a chance to finish it?
I believe we're good to go. Let me just throw out that we do have a question that
Okay.
maybe we could do. Yeah, okay. Would it be okay to bring up limitations that one faces in, oh wait, sorry, maybe my chat is just catching up. I think this is a question that you've already answered.
Okay. Yeah, don't talk about your limitations. Never talk about your limitations. But you know, you can talk about challenges that you faced in your teaching in the past, but you've worked to overcome them, and explain to us how you've overcome them. Because we don't want somebody necessarily who's perfect. We want someone who recognizes, who can reflect on his or her performance, and then figure out how to make it better next time.
I think the question also might take it one step further. Maybe you could address this a little bit more. You say not to mention limitations, but what if the limitations that you're facing are because, especially as maybe a TA or as somebody who's instructing an online course, you're given a pre-created shell or a syllabi that you don't have leeway in changing? How do you address those limitations, but discuss them in a way that shows that you want something more for it?
Yeah, exactly. So you want to be careful about the language that you choose to describe this. So don't say a limitation to my teaching. Instead say, I've had this opportunity thus far, and I'm eager to take this forward in these particular ways. or I've had this challenge in the past and I've addressed it, or here's this, you know, even though I have, and this sort of uses language that shows a limitation, but even though I've taught from syllabi that were prepared for me in the past, here's a syllabus that I have prepared that I've shared in my teaching portfolio. And here are some of the strengths that I see in this portfolio. The thing is, you don't want to remind people that you have limitations. You want to remind people that you've had experience of one kind or another. And there's some people in this Zoom session who have a lot of teaching experience. There's some that have none, probably. But by the way, as you represent, think about, some of you have had tutoring experience. Tutoring is a form of teaching. Some of you have acted as mentoring. Mentoring is a form of teaching. Some of you maybe haven't taught at ASU, but maybe you taught in the K-12 schools. Talk about that. Some of you, I mentioned in the workshop that I do on preparing the CV, I was on a search committee at another institution where there were over 900 applications for the job. And one of the reasons the person got the job was teaching that this person had done in the Minneapolis Public Library, not at the institution where the degree was earned. And so, you know, think broadly about what it means to teach, and draw on that experience and convince us that that experience really has made you reflective about the practices of teaching and how you inform yourself to do an effective job of teaching and what your goals are as a teacher. Even if you have limited experience as a teacher, what are your goals for growth as a teacher? What are your goals for what you want your students to experience? And then get all of your friends to read drafts of those teaching philosophies and ask them the tough questions. You know, how much confidence does my teaching philosophy instill as you read it? You know, that's, you know, we want to predict what your growth is going to be. And, you know, and when we hire you, if we look at your research, for example, we also want to see, all right, here you are as a researcher. If we extrapolate that, where will you be 6 years from now when we do the tenure decision? So, you know, don't, in the hallway near my office here, there's a sign on an advisor store that says, don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle. So don't compare your beginning teaching career with someone who's been at it for a while. You can hold up examples of people who are your role models for teaching. That's fine. And talk about what it is that makes them a role model. I've had role models as teachers in my career. My first child, for example, is named Nick. He was named after one of the teachers I had as a college senior and then a master's student. He was such a role model for me. So, yeah, all of those things are possibilities. But just don't remind us you got limitations. Remind us that you're really eager to build on what you've already done. Is there anything in the responsibility section that anyone wants to observe? Okay. Well, yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about teaching philosophy in general? So I know that I need to talk about what I did in my classroom with like several examples, but do you think I could also talk about maybe, you know, concluding comments, maybe last paragraph of my teaching philosophy? Can I also talk about my kind of future plans, what I would like to teach by citing other scholars or books? Could I still do that too?
Absolutely. Yes, we'd love to see how you imagine your future. Now, you know, make that future generic enough so that it'll fit across multiple institutions. Or if you're going to teach at a particular kind of institution, maybe you need to craft your teaching philosophy for that institution. I've mentioned in some of the workshops that I've done constructing the CV. I have at ASU, I've taught many courses at ASU, of course, but at an institution like ASU, you tend to specialize in your teaching. When I came out of graduate school, there were some offers from small liberal arts colleges that I got where I would have had to teach a wide swath of the curriculum. I've evaluated academic programs at small liberal arts colleges where some departments have one faculty member, and that one faculty member teaches the whole curriculum. And so, you know, you need to tailor it a little bit to that kind of institution. But you know, you need to show, I think, a passion for teaching. You need to show how you plan, how you have grown, how you plan to grow. That's what you're talking about. You know, and in your letter of recommendation, you should also, or recommendation, application, you should also talk a little bit about that. And in particular, related to the job that you're applying for. Now, you mentioned other people who inform your teaching. You can talk about the things that inform your teaching. Like you could talk about critical pedagogy, for example, and some of you know that critical pedagogy is deeply rooted in Marxist work. And so maybe you want to talk about critical pedagogy, but maybe not use the word Marxist, because in some settings that might not help you. And so, you know, think carefully about this. Think about how will other people read this? That's why it's important to get as many people as possible to respond to your teaching philosophy and your other teaching portfolio documents to give you honest feedback on how well that philosophy and those other documents portray you as someone who's successful in the classroom at helping students to learn. How about these three choices that she made? Responsibility, engagement, and flexibility. Were those, do you think those were good choices? The other habits were things like creativity and persistence. You don't need to answer that now. I mean, be thinking about that. And do be thinking about how to organize your teaching philosophy. I mean, this is one way to do it. Chronologically is another way to do it. Maybe some big questions that teachers face, or some themes that go throughout your teaching. And these are actually themes that she has here. So that you're not just, you know, sort of wandering through the teaching philosophy.
We have a question about the subheadings. How should those be organized? One, is it important that they're just single words so that they stand out more? Can they be organized under different sorts of themes? Or
yeah, absolutely, you can do that. The main thing that you want to do in any of these materials, and that's true of your CV as well, is you want to make it as easy for people to read as possible. She wouldn't need these subheadings, but I think these subheadings are really helpful in helping us to focus our attention as readers. All right, this section's on flexibility, and I don't have to figure that out as I go along. It's announced up front. So subheadings can be really helpful. Get responses from your friends again. Ask them for suggestions for things that might be more effective. And it doesn't have to be a single word. It doesn't have to be a phrase. It could be a sentence. You know, flexibility could be flexible learners are effective learners, or something like that. You're always making rhetorical choices. What that means is you're making the choice of how will my language, talking about my teaching, yield the response from readers that I want. And so get readers to give you feedback, your friends. And by the way, friends need to be candid. Friends need to be honest. They can't say, oh, that's really nice. Anything else that in the remaining few minutes? So how many people are on I can't see the total number. How many people are on this, in this session?
Currently, we have 21. We had a few more, but they had to leave early.
All right. You mean their world doesn't revolve around me? I don't get it. So I will make this offer. If you want to send me a draft of a portfolio, a teaching philosophy, we could follow up with a phone call where I could give you a little feedback, or a Zoom session. Zoom is sort of my preferred method these days. So I extend that offer to you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you mentioned scholarly teaching as sort of teaching that's grounded in theory and sources.
Theory and research and practice in the field.
Yes. And I'm curious sort of how we apply that to the teaching philosophy. And it seemed the example, cited one source as a guiding theme for her philosophy.
Yeah.
And so I guess we don't want to, do a lit review of everything we've looked at in terms of theory.
Yeah.
And so is it okay to cite a few sources, I guess, in that philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. You can cite a few sources. And, in my field, in her field, she and I are in the same field. In our field, everybody pays attention to teaching a lot. And so that's just assumed. But what are the things out there that inform your teaching? It could be the teachers you've worked with throughout your life. It could be some books that you read. It could be, but I would become familiar with at least some of the research, theory, and practice in your field. What field are you in, by the way?
Anthropology, specifically archaeology. So.
Okay, yeah. So what are some of the what's some of the theory, research, and practice out there related to teaching in your field? Or it doesn't have to be in your field. It could be in some other field. But are you paying attention to what people are saying about teaching and learning?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious because it seems, we, at least in my program, I haven't been taught how to teach, essentially. So you hear a lot about active learning strategies, but it seems like we should probably go beyond that level of, pedagogy in our teaching philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah, and don't just throw terms out there like active learning. I mean, active learning is really important, but just don't throw a term out because you think it's something that people want to hear. As we talked about today, if you value something, show us how you applied it in the classroom and how students enacted that in the work that they did in your classroom.
And does that also go for mentioning personal inspirations or mentors in your philosophy, especially I would assume if they were key to your field?
Yeah, I would. You need to be a little careful about people you mention sometimes, because sometimes there's someone who's this really well-known person in the field, but the people who work with that person on a daily basis may not be all that fond of that person. So be a little cautious about that. So,
I have two questions here. So you mentioned about dream course. So I'm wondering if I can talk about my future, if I want to talk about my question is, dream course could be based on my dissertation.
Yep.
If yes, then how I could explain that. And then the second question that I'm having is, you also talked about the professional development. So just participating in professional development is enough, or do I need certain kind of certification?
No, you don't need certification. And, to my knowledge, other than K-12 certification for teaching, college teachers don't have certification for the most part. But what we're trying to see here is that you've invested some time and energy in becoming a more effective teacher is what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you've read the Boyer book, for example, or you've read this book on teaching that you really think is helpful, or you've talked with a faculty member about teaching. And you don't need to say that this dream course came out of your dissertation. You just say, here's a dream course, a course I'd love to teach. And it'll become clear to people reading your CV and your dream course syllabus, you know, what the connection is. You don't need to make that connection for them. But, you know, make the dream course something that's worthwhile. You know, maybe that course on the physics of SpongeBob SquarePants is worthwhile, but I don't think I would want to use that as the dream course that helps me get a job. So, and if you are a physicist, I hope you have the opportunity to teach a course on the physics of SpongeBob SquarePants someday.
Sounds like a fun course.
Yes, yes.
We have just about 1 minute left. So if there's any quick last words that you'd like to leave us with, that would be great.
Well, thank you all for being here today. And as you listen, if you list professional development, you can certainly talk about the work that you've done in this series. I do invite you again. Feel free to send me a teaching philosophy and have me look at it. It may be a while because the last 2 weeks, 16 to 18 hours a day, I'm focused on one topic, and that may persist for a little longer here. So, but thank you all very much, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about this topic. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to talk about a topic other than the one topic I've been focused on 16 to 18 hours a day.
I fully agree. And thank you so much for talking with us today, and thank everyone else online that joined in for this conversation.
Thank you all. Thank you. All right. Bye.